What missing you really looks like for an avoidant, the truth you don't see. Imagine standing outside a house at night. Every light is off, every curtain is closed, no movement, no sound. From the street you would naturally assume nobody is home. But what if someone is sitting inside in complete silence, thinking about a room they no longer enter, a conversation they can't forget, or a person they keep telling themselves they're over? This is where so many people misunderstand avoidance. They judge emotions by visibility. If the avoidant misses you, surely they would text, surely they would call, surely they would do something, and when none of those things happen, the conclusion seems obvious. They must not care, they must have moved on, they must have forgotten. But what if the biggest mistake people make is assuming that missing someone and contacting someone are the same thing, because for avoidants they often aren't. In fact, some of the strongest feelings they experience are the ones they express the least. Today we're going deep into what missing you really looks like for an avoidant, the parts you rarely see, the emotions they rarely admit, and the hidden process that unfolds long after everyone else assumes the story is over. And if you've ever found yourself staring at your phone wondering whether their silence means indifference or something far more complicated, make sure you're subscribed because this channel is dedicated to uncovering the emotional patterns most people never understand until it's too late. One of the most painful questions after a breakup, separation, or period of no contact is incredibly simple. Do they miss me? But beneath that question is another one that's even more important. If they miss me, why aren't they doing anything about it? This is where the avoidant experience becomes so confusing. Most people assume feelings naturally create action. If you miss someone, you reach out. If you care, you show it. If you love someone, you fight for them. But avoidants often operate differently. Their emotional world contains a gap that many people struggle to understand, a gap between what they feel and what they do. They can experience longing without expression, attachment without communication, regret without action. The problem isn't always a lack of emotion. The problem is that emotions often activate competing fears. Missing someone may trigger vulnerability. Vulnerability may trigger discomfort. Discomfort may trigger withdrawal. And suddenly the very feeling that should bring them closer pushes them further away. This creates a paradox that leaves both people confused. The person waiting for contact interprets silence as proof that nothing is felt. Meanwhile, the avoidant may be privately struggling with emotions they don't know how to handle. Silence and longing begin existing side by side. Not because they make sense, but because avoidance rarely follows the logic that most people expect. To understand this, you have to understand what is happening beneath the surface of the avoidant attachment system itself. At the core of avoidance lies a conflict that never fully disappears. On one side is the natural human desire for connection. Everyone wants to feel understood. Everyone wants companionship. Everyone wants closeness. But on the other side exists a fear that closeness comes with a cost. Dependence feels dangerous. Vulnerability feels risky. Emotional exposure feels overwhelming. As a result, avoidants often live with two competing needs that constantly pull against each other. They want intimacy, but they fear losing themselves in it. They want connection, but they fear the expectations that connection might bring. They want love, but they fear the vulnerability required to sustain it. This internal push and pull doesn't magically disappear after a relationship ends. If anything, it often becomes more confusing, because now the relationship is gone, yet the emotional attachment remains. The person is absent, but the feelings haven't received instructions to disappear. So the avoidant finds themselves caught between relief and longing, freedom and loneliness, independence and attachment. And because these emotions contradict each other, they often delay processing them altogether. This leads directly into something that surprises many people. Immediately after a relationship ends, many avoidants don't feel the crushing grief others expect. In fact, some experience something closer to relief. The pressure is gone, the emotional demands are gone. The difficult conversations are gone, the internal tension created by intimacy temporarily subsides. For a while this can create the appearance that they are completely unaffected. They seem calm, functional, detached. Sometimes they even appear happier. And for the person who is hurting, witnessing this can feel devastating. It can seem like proof that the relationship meant far more to one person than the other, but what often goes unseen is that avoidants frequently process emotions on a delayed timeline. The initial relief isn't necessarily the final emotional destination, it's simply the first stage, because while other people may confront their emotions immediately, avoidants often suppress, distract, compartmentalize, and postpone. They immerse themselves in work, They focus on routines. They keep moving, and for a while this strategy appears successful. The emotional consequences remain quiet, hidden, distant, but emotions have a way of waiting patiently. This is where the hidden timeline begins. While everyone else assumes the avoidant has moved on, something subtle starts happening beneath the surface. The absence becomes familiar. The distractions become less effective. The emotional pressure that once dominated the relationship fades away. And as that pressure fades, memories become easier to access. This is the stage most people never witness because it happens privately. There are no dramatic announcements, no visible breakdowns, no obvious signs, yet the mind starts revisiting places it avoided before. Small moments begin resurfacing. Ordinary conversations suddenly seem significant. Laughter that once felt routine now carries emotional weight. And this brings us to the first major sign that an avoidant is missing you. They begin replaying memories in private, not publicly. Not where anyone can see, not where they have to admit what they're feeling, but internally the relationship starts playing on repeat. Certain conversations return unexpectedly. Particular moments stand out with unusual clarity. They remember things they ignored when the relationship was active. The way you looked at them during a difficult conversation, a random joke that still makes them smile, a quiet moment that felt safe. These memories often arrive when they least expect them. Driving alone, sitting in silence, lying awake at night. And because avoidants tend to process emotions internally, they rarely talk about this experience. The outside world sees silence, but inside their mind the relationship may be far more present than anyone realizes. The truth is that missing someone often doesn't begin with a message. For avoidants, it frequently begins with memories they can no longer stop revisiting. And the reason those memories often become stronger with time rather than weaker is because avoidants frequently process relationships in reverse. While many people feel the deepest pain immediately after separation, avoidants can experience something very different. The beginning often feels manageable because the pressure attached to the relationship has disappeared. There are no expectations to meet, no difficult emotional conversations to navigate, no vulnerability demanding a response. For a while, the absence feels easier than the closeness did. But as weeks turn into months, something starts changing. The emotional intensity that once made the relationship feel overwhelming begins fading from memory. The arguments lose their sharp edges, the moments of pressure become less vivid. And as those uncomfortable feelings fade, something else becomes easier to see. The warmth, the familiarity, the companionship, the sense of being understood. This is why avoidants often miss people later than sooner. They are not necessarily avoiding the person anymore. They are finally encountering emotions that were hidden behind their defenses while the relationship was active. What looked like indifference in the beginning may actually have been delayed processing, and when that process finally begins, it can catch them completely off guard. This delayed emotional timeline leads directly into the second sign that an avoidant is missing you. They begin quietly checking up on you, not always in ways you can see, not always in ways they would admit. But curiosity starts replacing certainty. During the relationship, they had access to your life. They knew what you were doing, how you were feeling, what challenges you were facing. After the separation, that access disappears. At first, they may tell themselves it doesn't matter. They may convince themselves they don't need to know. But eventually, questions begin appearing. Are you happy? Are you dating someone new? Have you moved on? Do you still think about them? These questions often remain unanswered because reaching out directly feels vulnerable. So instead, they search for information indirectly. They check social media. They linger on posts longer than they intended. They notice updates. Sometimes they ask mutual friends seemingly casual questions. Sometimes they pay attention whenever your name comes up in conversation. The important thing to understand is that checking up on someone and contacting someone are not the same thing. Many avoidants remain in the observation stage far longer than people realize. This creates an internal battle that few people ever witness. On one side is curiosity, on the other side is fear. Curiosity says, I wonder how they're doing. Fear responds, what if I discover they've moved on? Curiosity says, maybe I should reach out. Fear responds, what if they reject me? Curiosity says, I miss this person. Fear says, if I admit that, what happens next? This silent conflict often explains why avoidants can spend so much time observing without acting. To the outside world, the behavior may appear contradictory. If they care enough to check, why don't they contact you? But from inside the avoidant mind, the answer is often simple. Information feels safer than vulnerability. Observation feels safer than exposure. Looking requires very little emotional risk. Reaching out requires much more. This is why someone can spend months wondering about you, thinking about you, and even monitoring your life from a distance while still remaining completely silent. The silence isn't necessarily proof that feelings don't exist. Sometimes it's evidence of the fear surrounding those feelings. Then comes the third sign, and for many avoidants, this is where missing someone becomes impossible to ignore. Random reminders start hitting with unexpected force. It happens when they least expect it. A song starts playing, a familiar restaurant appears while driving, a specific date appears on the calendar, a routine they once shared suddenly resurfaces. The strange thing about emotional memories is that they rarely ask permission before returning. One moment the avoidant is focused on something entirely unrelated. The next moment they are transported back into a memory so vividly that it feels almost present. They remember exactly how a moment felt, not just what happened, but how it felt. And that's what makes these reminders so powerful. They bypass intellectual defenses. They move directly into emotional territory. The avoidant who successfully avoided thinking about the relationship all day can suddenly find themselves flooded with emotion because of a scent, a location, a phrase, or a song they haven't heard in months. These experiences often feel disproportionately intense because they arrive unexpectedly. There is no preparation, no emotional warning, just a sudden reminder that the connection left a deeper imprint than they wanted to admit. What many people don't realize is that attachment creates powerful emotional associations inside the brain. Human relationships are not stored as isolated memories. They become linked to routines, environments, sounds, experiences, and feelings. When a relationship carries emotional significance, those associations become especially strong. That's why a simple object can trigger a cascade of memories years later. For avoidants, this process can be particularly disruptive because they often rely on emotional distance to maintain stability. Random reminders interfere with that distance. They reactivate emotional pathways that had become quiet. Suddenly, the avoidant is not just remembering you, they're feeling aspects of the relationship again. The comfort, the excitement, the safety, the longing, the loss. And because these emotions often emerge without warning, they can feel overwhelming. This is one reason many avoidants appear completely fine for long periods before unexpectedly struggling with memories months later. The emotional connection never disappeared. It simply remained dormant until something reawakened it. As these reminders accumulate, the relationship gradually shifts from being an event in the past to becoming an emotional presence in the present. Not because the avoidant is trying to hold on, but because the mind naturally revisits experiences that carried meaning. This is where many people misunderstand what missing someone actually looks like. They imagine dramatic gestures, emotional confessions, or immediate attempts to reconnect. But often, missing someone begins in far quieter ways. It begins with memories replayed in solitude. It continues through silent curiosity and hidden observation. Then it deepens through reminders that arrive without invitation and refuse to leave quietly. None of these signs guarantee contact. None of them automatically mean reconciliation. But they reveal something important. Silence and emotional absence are not the same thing. Behind many quiet exteriors exists an active emotional process that nobody else can see. And as you'll soon discover, those memories and reminders eventually lead to another stage, one where the avoidant begins measuring every new connection against the person they thought they had left behind. And that is where the experience often becomes even more complicated, because eventually life moves forward. New people appear, new conversations begin, new possibilities emerge. From the outside, it may seem as though the avoidant has completely turned the page. They may go on dates, they may enter new relationships, they may appear interested, engaged, and emotionally available, but what many people never see is the comparison process happening quietly beneath the surface. This brings us to the fourth sign that an avoidant is missing you. They begin comparing new people to you, often without realizing they're doing it. The comparison is rarely intentional. It doesn't happen because they wake up one morning and decide to measure everyone against the past. It happens because meaningful emotional connections leave a template behind. Once someone has occupied a unique emotional space in your life, future experiences naturally get filtered through that memory. A new person says something funny and it reminds them of a conversation they once had with you. A new relationship develops and they notice certain qualities feel different. Maybe the chemistry isn't the same, maybe the emotional safety feels different. Maybe the conversations lack a familiarity they once took for granted. These comparisons usually remain private because admitting them would require acknowledging that the past relationship still matters. Yet internally, the process can be surprisingly persistent. What makes these comparisons so significant is that they often reveal the true value of a connection only after it's gone. During a relationship, people naturally focus on what feels difficult. The mind notices conflicts, frustrations, unmet needs, and emotional discomfort. But distance changes perspective. Once the relationship is no longer present, the unique qualities that made it meaningful often become easier to appreciate. The avoidant may begin realizing that certain experiences are harder to replace than expected. It isn't necessarily about finding someone better or worse. It's about discovering that human connections are not interchangeable. Different people create different emotional experiences. The sense of familiarity you built together cannot simply be transferred to someone else overnight. The comfort of shared history cannot be recreated instantly, and the emotional language two people develop over time is often more unique than either person realized while they still had it. This recognition can create a strange mixture of gratitude, regret, longing, and confusion. Because once you understand what made a connection special, you also become more aware of its absence. This leads into another difficult truth about avoidance. New relationships often provide distraction, but distraction is not the same thing as resolution. Many people assume that moving forward automatically erases emotional attachment, but emotional attachment rarely operates on such simple rules. This is why sign number 4 often continues long after the avoidant has technically moved on. New experiences may occupy their attention, but unresolved emotions frequently travel with them. A person can start dating someone else while still carrying memories of a previous connection. They can enjoy a new relationship while occasionally wondering about someone from the past. They can appear completely fine while privately comparing emotional experiences they don't fully understand. This doesn't mean they are incapable of caring about someone new. It simply means that emotional attachments don't disappear according to a schedule. The heart doesn't follow deadlines. The mind doesn't automatically delete significant memories because enough time has passed. And for avoidants who often postpone emotional processing rather than confronting it directly, these unresolved feelings can remain active far longer than anyone expects. Eventually, this internal activity begins creating something even more revealing. Sign number 5 appears when the avoidant starts having conversations with you that never actually happen. Not in reality, in their head. They imagine what they would say if they reached out. They replay old conversations and mentally change the ending. They think about questions they never asked and answers they never gave. They imagine explaining themselves. They imagine hearing your perspective. They imagine apologies, clarifications, reunions, or sometimes even arguments. These imaginary conversations can become surprisingly detailed because the mind naturally seeks resolution when something feels unfinished, and relationships often leave behind unfinished emotional business. Things that were never fully expressed, feelings that were never clearly communicated, questions that were never answered. For avoidance, these internal conversations can become a way of engaging emotionally without exposing themselves to actual vulnerability. They get to explore the connection while remaining completely safe from rejection, criticism, or uncertainty. The fascinating thing about these mental conversations is that they reveal how emotionally present someone still is in the avoidance mind. You don't repeatedly imagine conversations with people who hold no emotional significance. The brain simply doesn't invest that kind of energy into emotionally neutral experiences. Yet avoidants may spend considerable time rehearsing messages they never send. They think about what would happen if they reached out. They wonder how you would respond. They picture different outcomes. Sometimes they even type messages and delete them before sending. The outside world sees silence. What the outside world doesn't see is the amount of emotional activity taking place behind that silence. This is one of the reasons people become so confused by avoidance. Their internal experience and external behavior often appear completely disconnected. Someone may look detached while privately thinking about you every day. They may appear indifferent while repeatedly imagining conversations that never happen. They may seem emotionally unavailable while wrestling with feelings they haven't shared with anyone. But this is where another powerful force enters the story. Because if missing someone automatically led to action, many avoidants would reach out far sooner than they do. The reason they often don't is because every imagined conversation eventually collides with a familiar obstacle: fear. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of discovering that too much time has passed, fear that you no longer care, fear that contacting you will reopen emotions they worked hard to suppress. The longer the silence lasts, the bigger these fears can become. What started as a simple message now feels emotionally loaded. What once required a few words now feels like a risk. and so the avoidant remains caught between two opposing forces. One part of them misses the connection, another part of them fears the consequences of acknowledging it. This tension creates one of the most misunderstood realities of avoidant attachment. Missing someone and reaching out to someone are not always linked by a straight line. Sometimes they are separated by months of hesitation, internal debate, imagined conversations, and emotional conflict. And as that conflict continues, something else begins to happen, a gradual reshaping of memory itself, where the relationship starts looking very different from how it looked when it first ended. And that reshaping of memory brings us to sign number 6. Over time, many avoidants begin romanticizing the relationship. This does not happen immediately. In fact, it often happens only after enough distance has been created. When the relationship was active, their attention may have been pulled toward everything that felt overwhelming. The expectations, the vulnerability, the conflicts, the moments that triggered their fears. But memory is not a perfect recording device. It evolves, it reorganizes experiences. And as time passes, negative emotions frequently lose intensity faster than positive ones. The arguments that once felt enormous become blurry. The pressure that once felt suffocating becomes difficult to fully remember. Meanwhile, the moments of laughter remain vivid, the comfort remains vivid. The feeling of being understood remains vivid. The avoidant who once focused on why distance felt necessary may gradually begin focusing on what was lost because of that distance. This is not deliberate. It is simply the way human